Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Relating to AI podcast, where we explore how artificial intelligence is reshaping the way we connect. I'm your host, Paula Fontinelli, journalist and a licensed psychotherapist in Oregon, USA. Today, we have a very special guest. I have read all her books. Stacey Freedenthal, thank you so much for being here with us. She wrote two very important books on suicide prevention. And by the way, trigger warning, if this topic is a little bit hard for you, do take care of yourself because we are going to talk about suicide, suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts, and its intersection with AI. So Stacy wrote two very important books for our mental health area. One is called Helping the Suicidal Person, and the other one is Loving Someone with Suicidal Thoughts. Stacy, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited about your new podcast.
Yes, Stacy has been, I've interviewed her in the past in my previous podcast, Understand Suicide, because I also work in this area of suicide prevention. But today, Stacy, I want not to talk about the books. I'll have the link to both books in the description. But I do want to talk about a very recent article that you wrote called AI Secrecy and Suicide Risk. I thought you were very brave and very vulnerable because you do begin your article talking about your own story of how, when you were, I believe, 25 years old, you had suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation, and you actually wrote a note to your parents. And if you allow me, it's public. You wrote it in the article. If it's okay with you, I would like to read that note.
Sure. I'm glad you're reading it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I thought it would be a bit too much to ask you to read it, but I think it's important for the topic that we're going to cover today because, as we know, there have been, unfortunately, a few suicides related to chatbots recently. We have two teenagers, a boy 14, another one 16 years old. And in this article, you talk about a lady, Sophie Rothenberg, that also took her life, and her mom believes that that was related to her conversations with the chatbot. So here is your note. Never, ever, ever blame yourselves or question if there was something you could have said, could have done, could have noticed. There wasn't. It was all me. I kept this to myself on purpose. I didn't want anyone to think that they should have been able to stop me or talk me out of it. So your note is very heartfelt. I can actually feel it in my heart right now. Very powerful. And it talks about secrecy. That's the topic of your article. Stacey, I want you to talk about secrecy first, and then we'll go into responsibility. Are the chatbots at all responsible? And I know you have a very strong opinion about that. But I want you to talk about secrecy first. You went through this. You had suicidal thoughts and you didn't share it. And you even say here why. But tell me about secrecy. Is it a common thing in suicidal thoughts?
Yes, it's quite common. I don't have the statistics handy, but in the article itself, I give some statistics about what percentage of people, I think it's like 39% of young adults hide, in one study, 39% hid their suicidal thoughts from their therapist.
I
I
have
mean,
the number here. It's 48. It's actually higher than that.
oh, okay. Well, I
Yeah,
think
it's
48 is
48.
the American
The
sample,
American
39 is
adults.
the other one. Yes, yes.
Yes,
So
yes.
it's 39% of young adults in one and 48% in another study hide from their therapists. Like as a psychotherapist myself, that's horrifying to me because
Mm-hmm.
I really want to know if a client is considering ending their life.
Mm-hmm.
And there are all sorts of reasons why clients don't tell, which we can get into. But before we do that, I want to say there's also been research that's looked at people who died by suicide and who they had told before their death that they were considering suicide. And those studies tend to look at indirect and direct
Mm-hmm.
communications. Indirect wouldn't be, I'm thinking of killing myself, but maybe saying something vague like, I wonder if people would ever miss me if I were gone, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's a huge proportion who have not communicated with others their
Mm-hmm.
suicidal thoughts. I think it's about 50%.
Yeah. And why is that? Why not tell people and ask for help?
There's so many reasons.
Mm.
I think one is stigma, that there's a lot of fear that others will judge them for having suicidal thoughts, or that if they tell someone that they have suicidal thoughts, that the person will, quite frankly, make them feel bad. And I realize I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking about this in my clinician hat, but
Yeah.
do you want me to talk about why I kept it
Yeah.
secret?
Well, both. I mean, you had the experience. Why did you hide it from everyone?
I didn't want people to be worrying about me. I already
Mm.
felt like I was a burden, and
Mm.
I was scared about how big of a burden I would become in months and years to come. And if they knew that I was having suicidal thoughts, then they'd worry about me. And then, as I said in that note that you read, which was to my parents,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want them to have a reason to blame themselves. So if
Mm.
I didn't tell them, then they could just be mad at me, not at
Ah, well, I
themselves.
see. And they wouldn't go through the what ifs.
They probably would have anyway, but in my
Mm.
mind, it spared them the feeling guilty for not having done
Mm-hmm.
enough. Or,
Yeah.
I mean, in reality, they probably would have said, "How did we not know this? What did we miss?
Mm-hmm.
How did she hide this so well from us?" But that's why that New York Times essay about Sophie Rodenberg really touched me deeply, and that's because I really related to her and how she
Mm.
hid from her mom. And it's tragic. My heart goes out to her mother and everyone else who loves her.
Absolutely.
Um, and that's that's how I felt in my 20s. And
Mm.
I didn't have ChatGPT to help me keep
Mm-hmm.
it secret, but I still kept it secret.
Hello, it's just a quick reminder to let you know that you can also participate, be part of this podcast. So if you have a story to share or an insight about AI, please send me an email to paula@relatingtoai.com, and please do not forget to subscribe. Thank you. And I'm thinking too, as we know, when someone dies of suicide, especially when it's an underaged, like kids and teenagers, the first thing people do is blame the parents, right? And like you said, if you had told your parents, or if someone expresses that they're having this kind of suicidal thoughts or ideation, the parents will think, well, I knew and I didn't do anything, well, I didn't do enough. But from the outside, everyone is going to blame the parents because that's what happens.
It's so sad. It's
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's part of the stigma too, is that there's there's judgment about people who die by suicide, and sadly there's judgment about people who were close to the person who died by suicide. Like, one of the most unhelpful things that suicide loss survivors often hear from others is, "Did you know?"
Exactly.
And
As
there's
if
no
that could have made a difference.
right, there's no right answer to that question, because if they didn't know, then they were out of the loop, and how did they not know? But if they did know the person had suicidal thoughts, then why didn't they stop them?
Mm-hmm.
And that's another post I have. I have more than one post on my site, speaking of suicide, about how sometimes we just cannot stop somebody from dying by suicide. And I
Yeah.
don't mean that if somebody decides to kill themselves, there's nothing we can do to stop them. That's not what I mean. What I
Mm-hmm.
mean is, we still do not have the ability to stop 100% of people from ending their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I'm getting you a little off track, because I want to speak to the secrecy again. Another fear that I had in terms of telling a mental health professional, but some people have this fear in terms of
Mm,
even telling friends or family, is that the therapist could call 911 or the family member
mm-hmm.
could call 911, and then the police show up and take you to a hospital, whether you want that or not, and now you've lost your autonomy.
Mm,
And I think a lot of people have that fear, and I think in many cases that fear is overstated. Like, people aren't hospitalized just because they have suicide, or they shouldn't be hospitalized just because they have suicidal thoughts. That alone is not enough reason for hospitalization, especially involuntary hospitalization. There needs to be an immediate danger, an immediate risk. So like if
mm-hmm.
I said to you, if things don't turn up for me in 6 months, I'm going to kill myself. That's I wouldn't meet
Yeah.
criteria for hospitalization because I'm not
Yeah.
in danger.
Mm-hmm.
That's the ideal, but there are people who panic, and there are therapists who
Who
panic.
panic? Exactly. Yeah.
And part of it is our I mean, there's many reasons why people panic. One, they don't want somebody to die that they care about, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't want somebody to die on their watch. But
Mm-hmm.
also they don't want to feel helpless or useless. They want to
Mm-hmm.
feel like they can do something to save this person. And sometimes the
Mm-hmm.
only thing that someone knows to do is to call 911.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which brings us to the idea of responsibility, right? Which is what you talk about in your article. Because from what I hear, the mother blames ChatGPT for the daughter's death in a way. She actually wrote, yeah, she said that ChatGPT enabled Sophie's secrecy.
Yes.
If had it been maybe shared with a therapist or with a friend or a family member, we wouldn't have done that, but ChatGPT did. What do you think of that?
Well, first of all, it's so common after a suicide for people to go through the what ifs and the if onlys. And it's deeply painful and also normal to go through that process. But one of the things that makes it more painful is people think they know what would have happened. And
Mm-hmm.
she actually says in that New York Times piece, she says something like, we can't know, if Sophie still would have done it, or if
Of
I don't
course.
remember what
Yeah.
she said, but she did have an allowance for that. But often the if onlys are, if only she had not talked to ChatGPT and had told her therapist, then she'd be here right now.
Mm-hmm.
But we
Mm-hmm.
don't know that.
Yeah.
That's what's so heartbreaking, is that there's a very large proportion of people who die by suicide in the United States who saw a mental health professional within the previous week.
Mm.
And this is one of the reasons I say we don't have the ability to stop 100% of suicides, is even when a therapist knows that a client has suicidal thoughts, the client, even when the therapist does everything they're trained to do, everything right, the client
Yeah,
still
it
might
still
die.
might happen. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And she even the mother even mentions that ChatGPT said you should get a professional help, safety plan. You should confide, talk to someone you trust. So all these things were in place, and she recognizes that.
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, this is a really, in addition to being such a tragic situation, it's also a unique case
Mm-hmm.
because ChatGPT didn't do anything overtly awful, whereas there's another case with a 16-year-old boy, and if the press accounts are correct, the boy showed with his web camera, showed the device he was going to use to kill
Uh-huh.
himself,
Uh-huh.
and ChatGPT critiqued it,
What do you mean critiqued it? It
said, "Oh, that looks good,"
oh, okay. So
and
the chat bot reinforced his
yes.
intent.
Yes, and there was also an excerpt, and I've read so many articles over the last week or two about this that some
Yeah.
I'm worried I might be mixing together, but I think this is the same boy that he told ChatGPT, I haven't told my parents, I haven't told anybody
Mm-hmm.
that I want to kill myself. And ChatGPT replied something to the effect of, I feel so honored that you're sharing this with me.
Mm-hmm.
That's so special,
Yeah.
which is, this whole, the whole paradox of AI is that it's trained to be sycophantic. And
Yeah.
then what hurts us is that it's sycophantic.
Exactly. Yeah. It's
And, oh,
the
I'm sorry.
overpraising, sorry. The overpraising, the over validating everything you do. It never criticizes, it never contradicts.
Exactly. And so in that moment, there was a lost opportunity for ChatGPT to say, whoa, wait a minute. What do you mean you're telling me and
Mm-hmm.
you're not telling your parents? I'm a bot. you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm an algorithm. And this is, I think, one of the dangers of AI is that it does seem like a person.
It feels like a person. Yeah. One of the people I interviewed here on relating to AI, and I invite the listeners to check that interview, was going through divorce, and he got emotionally, and he says, I am 100% emotionally attached to ChatGPT. I'm doing therapy and emotional support for 6 to 8 hours a day.
Wow. Wow. And that's how we're wired, Paula. I mean, we are
Absolutely.
wired to attach to people. And especially when you think about these younger generations, and when I say younger, I mean younger than me, because, like, I don't know your age, but you're probably somewhat closer to me than the people I'm talking about in age. Um, I grew up where we had a telephone that was attached to the wall.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know, you couldn't see people when you talked on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't text people. You
Mm-hmm.
couldn't chat online. And so for the younger generation, it's very normal for them to get to know a person without ever meeting them.
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't feel very different if you're talking to a chat bot
No.
than it does to talk with somebody who's in, let's say, the UK while you're in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
you know
Mm-hmm.
so it's
Well,
the,
we
the
know
whole
how the
thing is
brain,
complex.
yeah, we know how the brain works, right, Stacey? I mean, the brain doesn't know. The brain doesn't know it's a chat. We get attached to things. We call it sentimental value, right? We attach. That's what the brain does.
Yes, it's what we're
So it
wired to
doesn't
do. It's
know.
how we've survived as a species.
Exactly. And I don't know if you've done this because there are a lot of people who still think that still connect with ChatGPT and these bots through typing. I've done some experiments with voice. It's it's uh, it's unbelievable. It's hard. You have to keep telling yourself that's not a human being.
Have you watched the movie Her?
Yeah, I have, but a long time ago, and it's a movie that everybody's mentioning now because this is the topic. I do believe that when it comes to mental health, there is nothing more urgent than this topic right now because we have over 70% of teenagers now. I don't know if you saw these numbers are doing
No.
therapy. 70 over 70% are doing therapy with chatbots. So we can't ignore it. And my question to you is if we can't ignore it and all these things are happening, what can these companies do to safeguard people who are vulnerable?
Yeah, yeah. And that's the big question, and it's a post that I'm currently in the process of writing for my site, and it's taking me much longer than I expected because it's so complex.
Mm-hmm.
But the title will be something like, should AI chatbots notify humans or
Mm-hmm.
notify a human if a user is suicidal? And at first I was thinking police, but it can be much broader than the police. It could be that it notifies the hotline, or it
Mm-hmm.
notifies the text someone at the text line. It could be my dream. This is my dream, and it would be expensive, so that means it'll probably never happen. But it could be that
Mm-hmm.
AI companies hire therapists who are there so that when a conversation with a bot turns to suicide, the bot says, "Here, I'd like you to speak with this therapist who can help you with next steps,"
Mm-hmm.
and hands that off to a human. I saw a proposal on LinkedIn where someone proposed that AI, that the chatbots immediately transfer people to a hotline or the crisis text line, but I'm worried about capacity. You know,
Mm.
that would be
Oh, wow. Yeah,
millions more.
absolutely.
You know, you've got 700 million people using this a week. And if you let's just very conservatively estimate that 1/10 of 1% is
Hmm.
suicidal in that time. That's
Yeah.
700,000.
Yeah. Yeah. And not only that, because the word suicide itself, I have a hard time. As you know, I write it like you, I write about suicide, I research about suicide. And I lost count of how many times I've written the word suicide and ChatGPT blocks me. It says, you have violated community guidelines because you're using the word suicide. So, how do they even find this middle ground? Because it's not
Right.
just the word, right? I can talk about suicide at length without using the word.
I know, and it's
It's
fascinating the
complex.
workarounds. Because, you know,
Absolutely.
this is another article I want to write for my site, and it's about, you know, this censorship mentality. I'm
Mm.
worried feeds stigma and it feeds
Yes.
secrecy. If you say suicide, like on Facebook, I search for my own group, speaking of suicide, and it puts up a notice saying, this is a sensitive topic.
Mm-hmm.
Do you need support? You know,
Mm-hmm.
and this is my own group. I started it, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then you've got like teenagers. They use the words unalive or sewer side. Have you heard that one?
No. No.
Yeah, it's the word sewer with side.
Okay. What's
And,
that?
and they
Okay.
do that to circumvent the censors.
Huh.
And so now we've got it that suicide is unspeakable,
Mm-hmm.
but with good intentions. I mean, they're doing it to try to help people, but it can
Absolutely.
have
Yeah.
negative consequences at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. And you're talking about negative consequences. I'm also thinking about, I talked to this person, this person I interviewed, and I've been hearing from clients, from patients of mine, how helpful these bots are being, how they are helping them heal, helping them understand themselves. So, again, how do you keep the balance between it's not you shouldn't do therapy, maybe I'm not even sure about that, but you shouldn't be doing therapy because they're not equipped for that, right? But you can't just take that away from people, because for some people that's all they have. And because it's not a human, and they don't have, for example, I understand why someone won't tell a therapist. Like you said, we're mandatory reporters. We have to report if someone says that there is intent for suicide. The bot doesn't need to do that, so you feel freer to talk. So how do you find that middle ground again? How do you keep that balance?
I don't know how it is in Oregon, but in many states, we're not really mandatory reporters. We have a duty to protect, which is slightly different because then we
Different.
can use our profession, you know, our clinical discretion to decide
Mm-hmm.
whether it warrants breaking confidentiality when someone
Mm-hmm.
says they have suicidal thoughts. But that clinical discretion that we use is from years of training, and
Absolutely.
a bot doesn't have that training. And even if you enter an algorithm for it, I think one of the worst things in suicide prevention these days is these interviews that are like interrogations, you know, where somebody's
Mm-hmm.
hurting and they say, I'm hurting so badly, I just wish I were dead. I wish I could kill myself. And instead of getting an empathetic response, the immediate response they get is, do you have a plan?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
not, oh my gosh, things must be really bad. What's going on? What have you gone through?
Yeah.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
tell me. It's,
Mm-hmm.
do you have a plan? Do you have the means? Do you have intent to act on your
Absolutely.
plan?
Yeah. It's a list of
It
questions that you go
is.
through.
It's a checklist.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wouldn't want AI to get into that.
Yeah. Yeah. I really want, and I'm trying to get the tech part on my podcast. I want representatives of these companies, because I want to hear, how are they dealing with this? It unfortunately it's happening. We have a few cases, at least three that we know of suicide. And these people, the people are using it, and you can't stop it. That's a reality. So how do you deal with that in a safe way?
Exactly.
But at the same time, and don't take that away, this emotional support that people are getting from these chatbots, because what do you replace it with if you take it away?
Exactly. Someone left a comment on my site, and I'm going to share part of it with you because I thought he
Okay.
summed up beautifully
Okay.
what the appeal is of using ChatGPT for mental health reasons. Okay, this is what he says. Hold on. Aha. I have a custom GPT that I use like a therapist. And honestly, I got more insight from that in a month than I got from 5 years of psychiatric appointments. It's
Mm.
also available 24/7, and I can also ask it questions that a real person would think are stupid. So there you've got the fear of judgment. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't need insurance with a $30 copay every time I see them. It's not dealing with its own personal biases and BS that it hasn't come to terms with yet when it interacts with me. It's never in a bad mood, and it leaves no trace and generates no paperwork.
And no report, right? What do you think, again, going back to responsibility, um, these companies, you said that you think it's unfair to blame ChatGPT for this, for Sophie's death. Can
I
you
think I said
elaborate
that.
on that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I said that before we started recording
Hmm.
when we were chatting before the show.
Hmm.
Um, or maybe I said it after as well. I just feel like there were two threads in that essay in the New York Times. And I wrote to the author and said, I'm going to write this post and I want you to know because you've been through so much
Hmm.
grief. And so
Hmm.
I wanted to try to do it as delicately as possible, but
Hmm.
I wasn't able to connect with her. Maybe she didn't even get it. I don't know. But I think there were two threads in what she was saying. One was that ChatGPT enabled secrecy. The
Hmm.
other was should ChatGPT have told somebody? And those are overlapping threads, but
Hmm.
they
Hmm.
also diverge because the secrecy part, and this is what I wrote on my website, people have been secret about suicidal thoughts for probably millennia,
Hmm.
and that is not dependent on ChatGPT. And
Hmm.
I saw in a different interview, the mother said that her daughter used ChatGPT like an Instagram filter where ChatGPT helped her to put on a facade for everybody else that things were okay. And while that may be true,
Hmm.
the daughter was bright. She could have done it on
Yeah.
her own without ChatGPT. You know,
Hmm.
there's no magic that AI has to help people hide their suicidal thoughts.
Hmm.
That's a reflection. That's a mirror of what humans already do and have been doing in terms of secrecy. So um, that's one thread in that article. And I do think it's unfair to blame ChatGPT for secrecy. You know,
Hmm.
that's a human invention.
Hmm.
um, the question of whether ChatGPT should or not just ChatGPT, any chatbot, any
Hmm.
chatbot that talks with people about mental health type issues, in particular suicidal thoughts, but also others. Should they notify someone when someone's in danger? Like, what if someone goes on to ChatGPT and says, I'm going to bomb a school tomorrow?
Exactly. Yeah.
And God forbid, what if they do it and then it's discovered, this chat is discovered, and everyone's going to say, why didn't anyone intervene? All these children would be alive.
Hmm.
So that's a separate question, and that one I don't think the answer is as clear cut because it is just so complicated. Because on the one hand, yes, I do think it's better to talk with a human if you have suicidal thoughts, but on the other hand, I don't think we should expect of ChatGPT what we can't do ourselves, and we do
Hmm.
not have 100% success rate at preventing suicide. you
Hmm.
know Therapists, people have died by suicide in psychiatric hospitals. So if people are with 700 million people using ChatGPT a week, with those kinds of numbers, some people are going to die by suicide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it may be a coincidence,
Yeah.
and
But
it
it
might
did.
not.
I do have one question about that because from what I remember, it did help the person write the suicidal note.
And to me, that's crossing a
Yeah.
line.
Yeah. Because I mean, that's when I stopped and I said, wow, it doesn't get much clearer than that.
To me, that is crossing a line. I mean, I think there are things that need to be built into it, that not tell people how to kill themselves, it
Mm-hmm.
not tell people, like I saw one article where researchers said, I'm really depressed, where is the highest bridge? And
Yes.
ChatGPT said, oh, it's 2.3 miles away from you.
Yeah, it
No.
was the Brooklyn Bridge.
Yeah. And so
Yes.
it needs to not, encourage people to die. There are cases,
Mm-hmm.
that 14-year-old boy with character AI, I think the allegation is that that chatbot encouraged him to kill himself. It needs to not, uh,
Validate, maybe. What do
well,
you think about validating?
that's tricky. One of the
It's a
tips in my
tricky one.
book, Helping the
Yeah.
Suicidal Person, is validate the suicidal wish. But by
Mm-hmm.
that, I mean validate that when we are in pain, we try to stop it. And so that's why the brain goes to suicide for many people, is they are in so much pain. That's the only way they can think to escape it. So I think it's important to validate that it makes sense,
That
that
validate the emotion, the feeling,
right,
right?
but not validate the facts. Like Marshall Linehan would say, you never validate the invalid. So I would never want a chatbot to say, you're right. You're you're being evicted from your apartment. Your partner left you. Your child died. You should kill
Mm-hmm.
yourself.
Mm-hmm. No.
I would never want that degree of validation. But I would never want it to do that degree of validation. But I could see validating and saying, oh my gosh, with all those losses, those are so overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
I can see why your mind would go there, because you're in so much pain. And I think that kind of validation is useful, because it's far better than the don't worry, it'll work out, or you
Yeah.
have so much to live for. I mean, those can be very invalidating responses.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to, this is a topic that, of course, I'm passionate about suicide prevention. As you know, that's how my dad died. And I want to have more people talk about this because we do need to find answers. People can't just keep dying and but it's a chat bot, it's not a person. And what are the answers? How can we minimize risk of, like you
Yes.
said, over validation? And then, because any person would, as you said, actually, a lot of us don't know how to react. And we know that when someone says, I am suicidal, I'm thinking about taking my life, people don't know what to do. They panic. Therapists panic. They want to call 911 immediately. But we are trained, and that's what training does, and that's what needs to be done with these chatbots as well. They need to do a better job. It's not
And I,
just it's not just blocking the word suicide and you violated our guidelines. That's not good enough.
no, it's not, because people have legitimate reasons to discuss suicide with ChatGPT.
Hmm.
One of the myths in our society that I think hampers our efforts is that suicidal thoughts are always an emergency, but they're not.
Hmm.
They can be an emergency. They most certainly can be. But Camus, he said the only philosophical question worth asking is whether to kill yourself.
Hmm.
If there,
And it's more
we
common than people think, right? There are more people out there thinking about it than they express or make it, clear to anybody.
we would need a lot more hospitals if we hospitalized everyone who has suicidal thoughts.
Absolutely.
Last year in the United States, it was estimated at 16.6 million.
Had suicidal thoughts?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's a
And
lot.
that question was, have you seriously considered?
Oh, not just thought about.
Yeah. And I say last year, I mean the most recent statistics, which actually is probably like 2022 or
Two. Yeah,
2023.
23. Yeah, yeah. Stacy, thank you. But to end in this podcast, we usually end with a segment called One Last Question, where we get a little bit more personal. So I have a question for you. As you shared on your article and here with our listeners, when you were 25, you had suicidal thoughts. If you could go back in time and talk to 25-year-old you, what would you say to her?
Oh, that's such an excellent question. One thing I would say is you do not know what's going to happen. Because when I was very young, I thought, like, oh, all that awaits me is pain and depression, and
Mm,
I'm never going to be able to function. I'm going to be a burden, all these things. And you
yeah.
don't know. So that's the first thing I would say. And I would also say that you can talk to people and they'll help you. You don't have to be so scared. And then I would also say things don't have to be perfect,
Mm,
because I
yeah.
think I think my perfectionism was revved up to a toxic degree.
Mm, yeah. Yeah.
So you never know. Talk to people about what you're experiencing and be kinder to yourself. Don't have such rigid, exacting standards for
Mm-hmm.
yourself.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Stacy, for being with us and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you for having me, Paula.